Gwendolyn Brooks, full history, real story. The city of Chicago lay under a heavy winter sky. Snow dusted the narrow streets of the South Side, muffling the usual chaos of buses, vendors, and children playing with sticks for baseball bats. The year was 1935, the middle of the Great Depression, and in a cramped two-room apartment, a young girl sat hunched over a notebook by the glow of a flickering lamp. Her name was Gwendolyn Brooks, the daughter of a janitor and a schoolteacher, a child of migrants who had fled the South in search of opportunity. The family had brought with them little more than hope, and even that was wearing thin. Gwendolyn pressed her pencil to the paper, writing lines of verse she barely understood herself, but felt. Words came to her like whispers from a world beyond the cold and hunger. She was only 13, yet already she sensed that language could be her salvation. Her mother often said, "You're going to be the Lady Paul Laurence Dunbar. You're going to make the world listen." But outside their apartment, the world was ruthless. On the streets, white policemen looked at her people as if they didn't belong. In the schools, teachers praised her talent with a condescending smile, as though surprised a black girl could craft such beauty. Still, she wrote poems about the girls in her neighborhood, about the weary women at the laundromat, about the men who walked home from factories with stooped backs. The struggle to be heard. By the time she was 16, Brooks had sent poems to every newspaper and magazine she could find. Rejections piled up. Some editors returned her work without comment. Others scribbled, "Too race-specific or too bleak for our readers." She learned early that the world didn't want to hear her truth. Yet, a tiny miracle happened. A few of her poems found their way into the Chicago Defender, the city's black newspaper. For the first time, her words appeared in print, her name inked beneath them. When she saw it, she clutched the paper as though it were a lifeline. But publication didn't erase poverty. Nights, her family still argued about bills, about food, about whether her father should take a second job. Sometimes the heat was cut off, and Brooks wrote wearing gloves, her breath clouding over the pages. One evening, after a particularly bitter fight between her parents, she considered giving it all up. What future could poetry promise but the voices in her head, the stories of her people, the music of their laughter and pain wouldn't let her rest. She whispered to herself, "If I don't write, who will tell our story?" Love and survival. In her early 20s, Brooks married Henry Blakely, a quiet, steady man who believed in her even when she doubted herself. They lived in a modest apartment, raising a son. Life was never easy. Rent consumed half their income, racism still followed them into every corner of the city. Yet Brooks wrote in stolen hours while her baby napped, while Henry worked late shifts, while exhaustion tugged at her bones. Her poems became sharper, deeper. She didn't write about distant landscapes or mythical heroes. She wrote about the children playing hopscotch in the alley, about the weary mother ironing clothes, about the drunk staggering home at midnight. Chicago lived in her lines. Breakthrough. In 1945, after years of rejection, Brooks' first collection, A Street in Bronzeville, was published. It was a revelation, raw, intimate, unflinching. Critics praised her voice, though some still tried to box her in, Negro poetess, they said, as though her talent couldn't stand alone. But Brooks didn't need their approval. Her people did. In crowded apartments and church basements, readers recognized themselves in her poems. For once, they were not invisible. 5 years later, her second collection, Annie Allen, won the Pulitzer Prize, making her the first black author ever to receive it. When the news came, She stood frozen in her kitchen, the letter trembling in her hand. The world finally had to listen. Fame and turmoil. But with recognition came a new burden. Invitations poured in: universities, literary festivals, interviews. Brooks, who had grown up in scarcity, suddenly stood on grand stages where audiences hung on her every word. Yet she could never forget the South Side streets where children still went hungry, where police still harassed black men, where opportunity still slipped through fingers like sand. In the 1960s, America convulsed with protest and fire. Civil rights marches, assassinations, riots. Brooks watched as her city burned, as young black men bled in alleys, as voices cried for justice that never came fast enough. Something shifted in her poetry. It became bolder, angrier. She no longer sought to fit into white literary circles, she wrote for her people, unashamed, uncompromising. Some critics turned away. They called her too political. But Brooks had found her calling, not just to craft beauty, but to wield it as a weapon. An unexpected turn. In 1967, at a writers' conference, Brooks experienced what she later called a spiritual awakening. Surrounded by young, radical black poets, she saw their urgency, their refusal to beg for acceptance. That night, she decided, she would no longer write to please the mainstream. She would write to empower. She began visiting schools, prisons, and community centers, carrying poetry like bread, feeding the hungry souls society had discarded. She mentored countless young writers, telling them, your voice matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Legacy of fire and grace. The years rolled on. Brooks never stopped writing, never stopped teaching. She became Illinois Poet Laureate, a voice woven into the fabric of the city itself. Children memorized her verses, young poets whispered her name like a prayer, yet she remained humble, always returning to her neighborhood, always walking the same streets that had shaped her. In the end, her life was not about prizes or fame, but about the stubborn belief that words could change the world. When she passed away in 2000, the city mourned as though it had lost a heartbeat. Murals appeared across Chicago walls, her face painted against brick and sky, her words etched in bright colors: we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. Closing scene. Imagine it, a winter night in Chicago, decades after that first one. Snow still falls. A girl in a cramped apartment opens a notebook, a cheap pen trembling in her hand. She writes about her street, her family, her world. She doesn't know it yet, but Gwendolyn Brooks once wrote for her so that she might believe her story, too, is worth telling. And so the cycle continues.